All right, hey everyone, welcome to the Classroom Live Q&A session. Um, I'm still a little bit flustered. We had some technical difficulties getting started, but we are here now. And if anyone has bared, why am I hearing myself?
Oh no, do you have two windows open? That's what happened to me.
I do, yeah. So, all right, problem solved there again. So
Oh, look, smart
you can
Rory.
see it's
I
amateur
already answered
hour.
a question.
Amateur hour over here. Sorry about that. And if believe it or not, we did actually prepare for this. We did like
We did a
a
test run
couple,
yesterday.
yeah, did a couple trial runs and everything. Like had it all sorted out. But then, of course, like here at the moment where it's time to actually do something, nothing works how it's supposed to. So anyway, it seems to be working now. We did get a few questions that got sent in, so I figured we'd start out with those. Anybody who's joining us that wants to ask any questions, just type those in the chat section, and I'll check that periodically, and hopefully we'll get those questions answered as well. But just to get us started, the first question, this guy's asking for advice as far as training modifications for a master's lifter. So, what are your thoughts on changes to volume or intensity, exercise selection, basically anything programming related that would be of interest to a master's lifter? Rory, do you want to start off with that, or do you want me to?
Well, I can start off in terms of I actually do work with a lot of masters lifters, and you have to definitely pay attention to how much volume they can handle. For masters females, I find that their bench responds well to higher intensity, lower volume, but with higher frequency. So that's what I found. And I specifically work with smaller master females. So that's what I found to be really important in terms of their bench considerations. And again, everybody's individual, and I think that's something that you discuss a lot, or at least in terms of what we've discussed with the emerging strategies, is that you really have to pay attention to how the person is responding. So I like that when you have a more advanced master's lifter, that's when you kind of want to start to really pay attention to how they're responding, what exercises and how much volume and intensity affects their recovery, how fast they recover. They tend to need more recovery, and I don't see females responding very well to higher intensity for the deadlift and the squat, but they do respond very well to higher intensity, lower volume, and higher frequency for the bench press.
So when you say higher frequencies, how far are you going toward high frequency?
Typically when I start to see, well, it depends where they're at. So if you're coming from a person who might just be benching once a week, try increasing the frequency to twice a week. So I found, like, I'll give you for instance, I have a female that just comes to train with me. She's not a competitive lifter or anything, but she does engage in like recreational powerlifting competitions, but she's not like a high level, like competitive powerlifter. But her bench press was stalling and I couldn't figure out what to do with it. And I was just alternating her bench press and her overhead press every training session. And then I found that when I benched twice a week with her and kept her overhead press on one day, so I increased her pressing by one pressing movement per week, her bench press took off again. So
okay.
I would say it depends where the person's coming from. You don't want to take someone who's benching one time a week and have them bench 4 times per week or 5 times per week. You want to adjust the frequency based on where they are and where you want them to go. So you don't want to just take someone from 1 or 2 times a week to 4 or 5 times per week.
Yeah, totally agree with that. Another thing that I like to say when it comes to this is a question that comes up a lot, and I end up working with a lot of masters lifters as well, a lot more than I expected when I first got into this business. I don't treat age as an issue, like, hey, you're over 40 or you're over however old. Like that's not a problem in and of itself. Recovery tends to be the common issue that you see pop up in those demographics, and that's thing that you would want to address, but that's not always a problem for everybody. There are definitely lifters out there, masters lifters, who can handle the workload, but then others maybe not. And there are plenty of non-masters lifters who tend to have recovery issues too. So if we're talking recovery type things, one thing that you're going to want to do is make sure that your volume is set at an appropriate level. The volume needs to go up over time in a general sense, but once you get to the point where you're starting to have recovery issues, like, volume's probably not going to go up significantly past that point, unless you're in a developmental stage where you can really affect your work capacity. So if your training age, for a lot of masters lifters, their training age is, measured in decades. And at that point, you're probably not going to, really have a work capacity revolution. So if you're running into recovery issues, one thing that I've seen help is to kind of go the other direction. And I think that's kind of what you were getting at as well, Rory, is to limit the volume a little bit, but pushing the intensity a bit more. Frequency, I find varies a bit. I think smaller lifters, and I think females tend to fit in that category, tend to do just fine with higher frequencies.
Yeah.
Bigger people tend to not do so well with it. So especially, I find that trait is kind of exaggerated a bit with masters lifters or lifters that having recovery issues in general. So that would be something to pay attention to. So as far as like mechanistically, what can you do to address this? I would pay attention to your recovery. So you can use track to help you do that. If you're not already doing it, you should be. It's available on the RTS website for free. It's under the app section. That's going to give you an idea of what your overall recovery is like, especially that long-term fatigue section. So that would be one thing to look at. That'll help you kind of understand, hey, is my training pushing me too much or not enough? And from there, you're going to want to adjust based on your real-world response to training. So if your recovery is fine and you're progressing well, then that's a happy place. Stay where you're at. If your recovery is good, but you're not progressing well, then you may want to actually do a bit more. Now, if you're not recovering well and you're not progressing, then it's maybe time to do a bit less, try to push the intensity or something else, take a different strategy. And then, the last, I guess,
Oh, I don't know who froze, me or Mike. Oh boy.
thoughts for masters lifters. All right.
Well, it froze for like 4 seconds on my end, so I don't know who else that froze for. So I don't know what your final thoughts were.
I'm not even worried about it at this point.
So basically, I think that both you and I look at things very similarly, but we have different terminology for everything, basically just look at how I look at it is just watch the individual closely or watch yourself very closely and modify things when you feel like they need to be modified.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I also fully understand that for a lot of people, they want a bit more than that, and I think that's where it can be helpful to have some different contingencies in mind, like, hey, if you're not progressing, but you're recovering well, then maybe do a bit more. Whereas in the opposite situation, maybe do a bit less. But you always have to walk it in, like even, I think a really good coach that knows what they're doing and, has a lot of tools in the toolbox can make those guesses a bit quicker.
Well, I think it's actually interesting what you said when we first started this conversation, and what I first said when we started this conversation is you have a lot of masters lifters and I have a lot of masters lifters, and maybe that's a smart decision for masters lifters. You know, like as you get older, it's safer and more and very helpful to have an objective eye look at everything for you. So that, I mean, I would say that a good percentage of my clientele is a master lifter, you know, and or a high level lifter, you know, or very competitive. So, you know, you might get away with doing things on your own or following templates for a while, but then when you get into that range of high level or master, I think that puts you in the category of having someone who's a professional help you and look objectively at all the factors and modify things as you move along in training.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's just an observation. I think that's pretty just came to mind as when you said you have a lot of master and I have a lot of master lifters. So
yeah. Okay, so next question that I want to throw out there, I think is right in your wheelhouse. Actually, it's about choosing the best footwear for squats. How do you go about choosing the best footwear for an individual?
So typically my first recommendation is that everyone should squat in a weightlifting shoe. The benefits to squatting in a weightlifting shoe there's so many of them, but one of them is that it's a very flat bottom. So it increases your base of support and your contact with the ground. So our feet are contact with the ground and our base of support. So creating a flat, stable base of support is going to be really important. The opposite end of that is squatting in like running sneakers. They're smushy and they have like the tip of the toe comes up and you're wobbling side to side. There's also the metatarsal straps on weightlifting shoes, and you can pull them really tight and they create medial lateral support in your foot as well. So you're not getting medial lateral shifting and you have a very solid base of support. Every time that I have put a lifter in a weightlifting shoe for the first time, they feel a dramatic difference in their stability when they're squatting. So in terms of the most stable shoe to squat with, a weightlifting shoe is going to be the most stable shoe to squat. Are you laughing at me?
Oh.
I thought he was laughing. Also, a lot of people complain or feel that ankle mobility is limiting their ability to hit depth or, you know, squat well. And having a 1/2 to 3/4 inch of heel is going to decrease the amount of ankle dorsiflexion that you need. So it's going to improve your ability to get into the bottom of the squat if you have any ankle limitation. I have never found someone to not be able to squat to depth in a weightlifting shoe who has an ankle dorsiflexion limitation. So that's the most important thing. Those are the most important things that I see, and that's how I choose a weightlifting squat shoe. I don't particularly like people squatting in flat shoes, but they might feel more comfortable. Again, comfort's going to be really important as well. So we want something that creates a nice base of support, creates medial lateral stability, and gives you the range of motion in the ankle that you need to squat to depth. So I would recommend a weightlifting shoe. I lost you. I'm frozen.
There, you're back.
Oh no, did I get cut off?
A little bit, but you're back now.
Okay, did I answer
you were
the
saying
question?
that's
No. I don't know if I answered the question yet then.
Yeah, we got as far as that's how you choose a shoe for squatting.
Yeah, so those key factors, so the base of support being completely flat, the bottom of the shoe being completely flat, having the medial lateral stability in the shoe, and having a little bit of a heel to provide freedom in the ankle joint to allow you to squat to depth.
Okay. So. I suppose my take on this one is pretty similar to yours in a lot of ways. So when I started out squatting in flat shoes because that's just what you were supposed to do. So that's what I did, and that's more or less what I got used to. However, I did come by a pair of weightlifting shoes, and I used them kind of for some assistance work that I was doing. And after using weightlifting shoes, Going back to the flat shoes that I was wearing at the time, which were probably Chuck Taylors, they felt really squishy, you know. And the big thing that that taught me was that, um, you know, it can feel stable to you, and you know that's a valid perception if that's the most stable thing you've ever felt up to that point. But that doesn't mean that it's actually stable, you know. Um, so the big lesson for me there was that, you know, what I was using wasn't really as good as I thought it was. So um, I started looking for a flat shoe that would meet the requirements of stability, you know, as far as a weightlifting shoe goes, and I really didn't find anything, you know, and that's kind of where I took a pair of weightlifting shoes and had them modified so that the sole was flat, so that I got the benefits in terms of stability from a weightlifting shoe without the limitations. So that was something that was really useful to me in terms of finding a flat shoe, and that's really the best flat shoe that I've ever used. Um, I've also seen, you know, something similar to what Rory was talking about, as far as the the heel seems to help some people in terms of their overall squat mechanics. I seem to have lost Rory, so hopefully I haven't lost everyone else. Um, so the heel seems to help a bit with overall squat mechanics. Um, I tend to have a pragmatic way of going about that as far as figuring out which shoe is going to be best for you. I would basically like to see you try both. Now, if you don't have both, you can try them, you know, without having to buy them. Basically, you can mimic a flat shoe by just squatting barefoot, and you can mimic a heeled shoe if you don't have one by putting a 10-pound plate under each heel. Um, Work up to about a 70% load and do it both ways, both flat and heeled, and video that from the side and see which one has better mechanics. I've had some people um, who, you know, just have better mechanics with a heel, and some people who have better mechanics flat. And, you know, that's kind of what I use as my guidepost for that. Now, if you do want to use a flat shoe, and you're looking for something commercially available, basically the only thing that I found that cuts it as far as stability goes are the Sabo deadlifting shoes. There are some other shoes that are flat that, you know, kind of get marketed as powerlifting shoes, but by and large, I haven't liked some major aspect of the shoe, either the fit. The durability is another big one. Sometimes, you know, those shoes aren't very durable. Like the metal shoes, for example, I tried those and they fell apart pretty quickly. So um, really the Sabo shoes, in terms of a commercially available flat shoe, does seem to be durable. It's, you know, it has a good fit. It's not terribly expensive, and it also provides, I would say, a comparable stability. You know, it's not to the same level as a weightlifting shoe, but you know, if you're looking for something commercial, then your choices are a bit limited there. So, Rory, we lost you for a few minutes
Yeah,
there.
I'm back, but going.
I continued to monologue, so I only hope that
I actually just jumping in on the last portion where you're talking about, I don't know, maybe I should talk about different shoe selection in terms of weightlifting shoes, because there are many weightlifting shoes out there to choose from, and how do you choose the right one for you? So can I go into that? Do we have time?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I have tried a few different weightlifting shoes myself and with my clients. You want, for the heel, you want the stiffest heel. So if you're looking at like the Adidas Powerlift, so there's going to be a range. Like some shoes are like $89 and some shoes are around $200 plus. And the price kind of goes with the quality of the shoe. So the Adidas Powerlifters are in that $89 range, and they're, you know, if someone's not sure if they want to try a weightlifting shoe, they don't really have a lot of money to spend, it's a good shoe. It's a little bit lower heel, but it's more deformable than the more expensive shoes. So typically, you know, I might find like that a more novice lifter who isn't going to be as serious or as competitive as someone else, and doesn't really have that much money to spend, but wants a weightlifting shoe. That's like the basic weightlifting shoe. If you're not going to spend a lot of money on weightlifting shoes, it's not that great and it's deformable. But then you also have, when you do get to the more expensive shoes, it's like, do you have a wide foot? Do you have a narrow foot? So which is going to be better for which? I find that the Adidas, the Adipowers are better for a person with a more narrow foot and a narrow heel. And the Nike Romaleos are, especially the Romaleo 2. So they just came out with the Romaleo 3, which is a totally different shoe in terms of like the foot of the shoe, not the heel is about the same. But the Romaleo 2 has a nice wide toe box. So if you are someone who has a wide foot, that's going to be a really good shoe for you. I personally have a very wide foot and I have a lot of trouble with shoes. And I had originally started with the Do-Ins, which is wide enough, but still caused me discomfort in the front of the foot, or from like around the metatarsal. But then when I switched to the Nike Romaleo 2, I had no issues like I had with the Do-In. So it was definitely a little bit wider and more comfortable for the front of the foot. The Romaleo 3 has a much softer shoe. And it's much more flexible. So I have found that people who really like the Romaleo 2 don't like the Romaleo 3 as much because it's much softer. So as a power lifter, we want something that's very stiff and not deformable. So that's why that like transition from the Romaleo 2 to the Romaleo 3 didn't really work for the power lifters, but it worked for the weightlifters. So those are things to consider. And heel height. Most weightlifting shoes are 3/4 of an inch. You can find some 1/2 inch heels. So you want to look at different shoes and kind of look at the effective heel height rather than like what it looks like on the outside. So it can look really high on the outside, but that might not be how high the actual heel height is. So most websites will put descriptions about what the effective heel height is rather than the actual heel height. So, yeah. So Adipower if you have a narrow foot, Romaleo if you have a wide foot, Romaleo 2 because it's stiffer.
Cool. Yeah.
And then Adidas Powerlifts. And John, what's the name of that one shoe that my aunt has, the white one?
VS Athletics.
VS Athletics are also a pretty good shoe, and they're cheap. They're like under $100. So
that was my first pair of weightlifting shoes.
They're just not cute. So if you're, so they come in like one color, and I personally think that they're an eyesore. So that's me. So, I mean, you also want to those are all things to take into account. Obviously, performance is going to be your number one, but from a female standpoint, like you kind of want to look cute sometimes. So I would not buy the VS Athletic for.
You get a box of multicolored Sharpies.
Yeah, you could send them out and have someone like colored donuts or write your name on them or something.
Last thing on shoes before we move on. I'll just.
John says that they have black ones for the VS Athletics now, which is
finally, it only took
eyesore
a decade
than the white ones.
Right. Only took a decade for that to happen, huh? But last thing on shoes, real quick, and then we'll move on. But just want to say again, anybody listening, if you have any questions, you can post those up, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. I mentioned taking a pair of weightlifting shoes and having them converted so that they were flat. If you like a flat shoe, or really if you're looking, I use them for deadlifting as well because the sole was thin enough that, I mean, there was no appreciable difference. And since it was not very compressible, you know, it had a lot of stability, which I liked for the deadlift, which, you know, we tend not to be as concerned about stability for the deadlift, but, you know, it's going to matter there as well.
It's interesting because I pulled in well, I pull sumo, so there's going to be that like horizontal displacement force that you can get in that you don't have in the conventional deadlift. And I pull in the Titan, I think they're deadlift slippers, not deadlift socks, deadlift slippers. And I got, because I saw a really cool pair of like Asics wrestling shoes. And I was like, oh, gotta have them. Bought them, and they felt tremendously more stable than the slipper. The only problem is because I have such a wide foot and they didn't have them in my size, they're a little too tight, so I don't like wearing them. So,
Right.
But they should be tight. Just they were a little too tight, but they felt more stable. And John actually saw a difference in the way that my deadlift moved because of how stable they were.
I would second that as far as the stability issues with the deadlift slippers. I was looking for a stable flat shoe, right? And so I tried those as well. I figured, if they were good enough for deadlifting, that they would be good enough for squatting as well, and they're not. I wouldn't really want to do. I wouldn't really want to use either one. They weren't as stable as I hoped they would be.
Are you talking about the wrestling shoe for squatting, or
no, I was
the
talking
slipper?
about the slipper.
Oh yeah, yeah.
I just seconding your
Yeah.
observation that it wasn't as stable as we'd hoped. But if you are interested in converting a pair of weightlifting shoes, I mean, it's pretty simple. I just took it to a shoe repair shop and told them what I wanted to do, which was basically, I want you to take the sole off. I want you to shave it down so that it's flat and put the sole back on.
What kind of shoe was that, and what was the sole made out of?
The sole was the composite rubber. So the kind that you would see in probably some older Dewins or the VS Athletic shoes.
Yeah.
The Romaleos or anything with those.
You wouldn't be able to do it with the, yeah.
Right, like the molded plastic, that's probably a no-go. But so I've done that. I also did that with the Adidas Powerlifts. And it didn't work so well. Actually, the guy, it wasn't the fault of the shoe, I don't think. It was that the guy who was doing the repair didn't understand my instructions very well. So had a bit of a language barrier there. But I went to pick him up, and he had resoled them with like a flat dress shoe sole. And I'm like, look, it squishes. I can squish it with my fingers, And, anyway, but honestly, if you're into doing it yourself, what I did at that point, I thought, well, I don't want to just waste the shoe, so I went to Home Depot and bought like the rubber flooring that you would use in the gym, and they have some really thin rubber flooring, and took that to a different shoe repair place, had him resole the shoes again. Had him resole the shoes again, but this time used that rubber flooring. And that worked. The only issue I had with that was that it wasn't super durable. So after 6 months or so, it started to break down. So anyway, those are my adventures at shoe repair places.
That's also, a lot of people when I'm advising them on buying a weightlifting shoe, and they're like, well, I don't want to spend $200, and they want to go with like the cheaper shoe. Well, the cheaper shoe is going to be a more deformable material, and it's not going to last as long. You buy a $200 shoe and it lasts you 5, 6, 7 training years versus 1.5, 2 years. And like the shoe is like, and falls apart,
right.
So durability in a shoe is going to be really like important also, because don't forget, it's not just your body weight that you're putting on the shoe. You're putting your body weight plus all the weight on the bar. So the shoes do really need to be durable, and we don't want to lose our force transfer into the shoe. So the more stable the shoe is, the more durable it's going to be long term. So spend a little bit more up front, and you get a lot more out of your shoe.
Yeah, I would.
And that goes for all equipment too. In terms of buying belts, people are like, "Oh, well, it's $90. I don't want to buy a $90 belt." Well, this $90 belt's going to last you 10 years, versus you buy some cheap one from, I won't name a company, and then it breaks down in 2 years. Then you have to spend another $90 on the belt anyway. So.
Just don't leave it in your car.
That's been a big thing right now. People just leave their equipment in their car. I've heard it's happened to like 4 or 5 people in the last year. They leave their gym bag in the car, and everything gets taken out of but they leave their stinky knee sleeves.
Right. So I've been told there's a decent like black market for like gym equipment. I mean, I don't know who out there, which of you guys out there are buying like stolen knee sleeves and stolen belts and stuff. But if you could stop that, that would be great.
Awful.
So, next question has to do with training twice a day. I'll just kind of read this out here. What do you think about training twice a day for powerlifting? I coach an athlete who would like to train twice a day due to time restrictions. 28 years old, CrossFit coach, powerlifting for 1 year, 85 kilos, 380 Wilks, training 4 days a week. And I'm thinking about two different options. One option would be doing lower body work in the morning and upper body in the afternoon. Second option would be main lifts in the morning, assistance and supplemental work in the afternoon.
I like option 2.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I'm with you as far as those options go. So,
comes down to prioritizing things.
Yeah, and I think in general it's going to be kind of, it's up to you and your response, right? I would start out, if it was me, I would start out with option number 2 and just kind of see how that worked. You have some people that are just not morning people, and if that's the case, then your performance may suffer in that morning session. And in that case, you may be better off to do something lighter, more supplemental, and save the main lifts for later. Especially if they're going to be separated by several hours. You know, the thing that you want to keep in mind is that you're trying to preserve the performance in the main lifts. You don't want that to suffer due to fatigue. So I would start off, like, my gut feeling is that second option is going to produce a better result in terms of performance. But, you know, individual differences always tend to throw a wrench in that. So just be on the lookout for it.
And also, I think that they mentioned this particular lifter is a CrossFit coach.
Mm-hmm.
So I would just consider, you know, I would obviously, like we just discussed, start with option 2, but I would think and expect that option 2 would probably remain the best thing, because their job is probably pretty physical throughout the day, coaching and on their feet and moving weights around. And, you know, so you just want, like, if he was just going to the office and sitting at a desk all day, then maybe he wouldn't be fatigued by the end of the day. But if you start your day standing with training, then you're coaching and training and lifting all day, and there's not much downtime, and then you come back and train after that, you know, you might want to, that might affect the afternoon performance. But that, I mean, it's again just seeing how it goes and responding to how it responds, basically.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the coach's biggest job, you know, is to respond to that emerging information. You know, that's what, I don't know, that's what makes a coach different than just following a cookie cutter program to begin with. So paying attention like that is.
Did you watch my last lecture? Probably not.
Well, I actually download the lectures and I listen to them when I'm driving in the car, because that's the most time that I have to listen to such things.
Did actually discuss in the last lecture, I did discuss the difference between a programmer and a coach. So that is exactly what the difference between following a program and being coached is, part of the difference between programming and coaching. So
you've got to, you know, coach pays attention, I think, is, if I was going to put it into a sentence, that's how I would say it. But anyway, I'm kind of rambling off topic on that one a bit. But the original question was about training twice a day. I generally don't have an issue with people training twice a day. I guess the biggest hang up that I do see about it is the potential for just mental burnout, mental fatigue. It's a lot of time in the gym. You know, you're doubling your warm-ups basically, and you know, it's going to increase the overall time that you're going to spend in the gym. So
more showers.
Right, more showers, more laundry. You know, so the support needed for that expands for sure. Like there was a period of time where I was training twice a day in a really similar sort of context. It was due to time limitations, and the thing that got me was just lacing up my shoes. Like I remember sitting there in the gym, like putting on my squatting shoes for the second time that day for however many days in a row, and just thinking, I really just don't want to be here right now. So I mean, it happens. So just be mindful of that. We kind of have a thing on our coaching team that occasionally we'll get somebody that signs up and they want to train 7 days a week. I want to train 7 days a week, or I want to train 6 days a week, twice a day, or something like that. And invariably, those people are not around for a long time. They think that's what they want, but they find out that like that's not easy, and in most cases not necessary. So I would be cautious as far as reaching for that. Now it sounds like the guy asking this question has already made those considerations, but I think it bears mention anyway. I would be cautious reaching for that 2-a-day training, just from a mental standpoint. But really outside of that, I don't see much problem with it. As long as you're not like dramatically increasing the volume or anything like that, then it seems like a rare time when it actually causes a problem. All right. Unless there's anything else on that topic. Kim, who's watching, says that she had to do 3 sessions today due to her work. Now,
where do you see the questions? I don't see questions.
Yeah, that's on the live chat on the YouTube video link. But
oh, I don't have that link.
Well, I do because
because you're too cool and I'm
right.
not.
Well, if I could get it together to get this thing started earlier, then
can you send me the link through here so I can?
Sure. But there actually doesn't seem to be any additional questions. So is there anything that you'd like to mention to the students from your class from this last 3 months?
The biggest thing that I noticed in terms of the analysis that they were doing on the videos in the Facebook group is that they're picking out everything. So when you're doing an analysis, you don't need to say, oh, well, she is looking up at the ceiling and her knees are out and she's doing this right. Like when you overanalyze, you're going to forget to see the things that need to actually be fixed. So really, if you have like a mental checklist in your head and you say, okay, that looks good. What is it that doesn't look good? And this is what we're going to focus on. So really, kind of, it's good to know what looks good, but you don't want to overwhelm the lifter either, and that's, so over analyzing something or over pointing out too many things it's going to overwhelm you because you might forget what you're doing, like you might forget that you're trying to find what's wrong and just pointing out everything that you see in the video versus what actually just needs to be focused on. And also if your communication then with the lifter might be overwhelming for the lifter. So you just really want to focus on 1 or 2 things at a time and the most important things first. So we talked about a hierarchy. So your hierarchy of attack in terms of what you want to correct. Okay, so their eye gaze might be all over the place, but they might be squatting with their knees together or their toes pointed forward. So which to you is the biggest priority, which is going to be the first thing that you need to focus on. And then down the line, okay, maybe you can focus on their eyes in 2 or 3 sessions once they get their knees stable and out, because they're not going to hurt their hips anymore, but they could if their knees are doing weird things. And then after they get that done, then focus on the other lesser important thing. So just not overwhelming the lifter and focusing on what needs to be fixed and not just pointing everything out, not telling the whole story in the picture. Make that checklist in your head and then point out what needs to be fixed. Does that make sense?
Honestly, it reminds me of the saying, Like knowledge is knowing a tomato is a fruit. Wisdom's knowing a tomato doesn't go in a fruit salad.
Yes.
Well, so I mean, it's one thing to know if something's wrong, but
Yeah.
it's important to exercise a little bit of wisdom in
Yeah.
terms of, not just shotgunning everything out there all at once.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also, like usually in the video, there's something if something really needs to be fixed, it's going to be obvious right when you see it, you know. So if a lift looks pretty good, you don't need to have 8 things wrong with it. You know, find
Right.
what's the biggest thing wrong with it. What's the glaringly obvious thing that's wrong, and then take it from there. So
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. Let's see. In terms of my classes, we're running quite a few of them, so I don't think I can do like a main takeaway from everyone. So,
well, what's
just
your
kind
favorite class?
of, my favorite class is the emerging strategies class. That's sorry, everyone else, but I don't know. I just think like as a class, it's so cool. Like it's a really neat concept, and it's a novel way to organize training, and it's a system that's set up to uh, reward the coach that's paying.
Oh no, I got knocked out again. Mhm.
All right. I'm not sure if I'm back live or not. I'm going to assume that yes, I am. And I um, was talking about emerging strategies and just how like as a method, it's set up to reward you if you're paying attention. It's set up to reward you for viewing the emerging information. Um, we have basically the traditional way of planning relies on prediction models. It's just kind of, we don't even think about it, but it's just kind of implicit in how the planning functions. And then, something happens, a lifter, uh, suddenly loses strength, which happens more often than it ought to. Things are going along and they're not excessively fatigued, and things seem to be fine, and then all of a sudden one week they're just 10% weaker than they were the week prior. And as a coach, you have no idea what to do in that situation, so you just kind of start pulling your hair out. And so I think the emerging strategy provides a framework for how to deal with contingency situations, and provides a framework for how to respond to unexpected changes in an athlete's performance. So that's one reason why I think that's so cool. So sorry, we kind of lost everybody there in the middle for a second. So
We're back.
I don't know. Rory's back, so hopefully that means that this.
Oh. Did you just freeze again? Oh, Lord.
How long is this thing going?
It's almost over. You want to say hi while Mike's frozen?
No, it's
Oh, dear. I don't know what's going on.